Here, read this.
Woof.
So today I'm going to be talking about chapter 3 of Wind in the Willows. I've come to what looks like Toad Hall to do so. I should have chosen here for the last chapter really, because that's where we were, or at least where we started. This chapter is on the wild wood, and there is woodlands around me. They're not particularly wild and frightening. As with the previous two videos, I'll be providing 5 highlights from my reading notes from chapter 3. It's not a summary of the chapter, but I will just quickly contextualize for those who are reading along or perhaps haven't read Wind in the Willows before. So in chapter 3, Molly decides to venture into the wild wood following some, well, I was going to say warnings from Rat not to do so, but as we're going to see, those warnings were pretty mild. Don't really think Molly knows what he's letting himself in for. He gets to the wild wood and he is frightened by faces, presumably weasels glowering down at him in the wood. He gets lost, gets very frightened, and Ratty, who wakes up having fallen asleep composing verses, comes to the rescue. And at the end of the chapter, they find themselves at the doorstep of Mr. Badger. And we're going to start with Mr. Badger for takeaway number 1, because although he doesn't actually make an appearance in this chapter, his influence is felt, and Ratty mentions to Mole that this is how it goes with the animals in the surrounding area. Badger is an unseen presence exerting influence on them. And so this was really the first thing that jumped out to me about this chapter. Given that we will be meeting a pagan deity later on in the novel, Badger is described in tones that makes him too sound almost like a local god of the woodland, an unseen presence who moves in mysterious ways and who you must accept where and how and when you find him, as Rat says to Mole. Language that is in stark contrast to how he described Toad. If you remember from chapter 2, Ratty says of Toad, he's pretty much the same fellow all the time. And I mentioned how this is quite odd to say of Toad and of a Toad. Here we have almost the opposite sentiment said of Badger, who, if anything, seems very reliable, very stolid, very stoical in his views. He is the one who is described as being unpredictable, who you might have to adjust to what kind of badger you find. That's quite interesting. And finally, just to wrap up this theme of Mr. Badger as a woodland deity, at the end of the chapter, when Ratty and Mole discover the name of Mr. Badger and realise they are saved from the terrors of the wild wood, Molly falls down at the words Mr. Badger and cries in penitence. Okay, moving on to my second takeaway. It sounds like I'm filming a mukbang or something. Molly is struck by the nakedness of nature. When he makes his escape out into the woods and he sees all the trees shorn of their leaves, it's described in rather odd terms. Graham ascribes to the landscape an emotional response to its nudity. It's quite shy, its secrets are pathetically exposed. He says something like that. It's almost as if it's embarrassed to be caught without its clothes on by Mole. And he also mentions that the landscape is unable to trick Mr. Mole with its usual old deceptions. From Mole's reaction to this, we have another glimpse of what Graham calls his candid nature in the previous chapter. He is sort of emboldened by the sight of nature nude and was glad that he likes the bare bones of nature unadorned. It's almost as if Molly is imagining the signs of spring in bloom as something pompous or elaborate, artistic pretensions, the billowy draperies of spring. Molly, as we have discussed before, is not an artist, but I think we get a sense of his artistic temperament from this passage. If he was to write poems, they would be brutish and short, I think, straight to the point, matter of fact, getting down to the bare bones of the matter. Plot-driven, perhaps. None of this messing about in prose. I guess if you spend your life digging holes, you've earned the right to say, a spade is a spade. Okay then, number 3, Rat, when he comes to the rescue and finds Mole in distress, he chides him by saying, you know, I really tried to warn you about the terrors of the wild wood. I did my best to keep you from it, he says. But as we saw earlier, no, he didn't. What he told Mole is that we don't go there much. And when he described the dangers of the wild wood, the weasels, he said he was on friendly terms with all of them and would happily while away the hours chatting to them. So Rat's a little bit contradictory in the least here, and perhaps dangerously hypocritical, as we will see when we go to takeaway number 4, which has to do with the preparations Rat makes when he comes to the rescue. We see him pack a couple of pistols and a cudgel, clearly a sign that he is anticipating something more dangerous than, a catch-up with one of the weasels. Then, just to make this whole picture even more confusing, he finally tells Mole that to go into the wild woods, you will need passwords and signs and sayings which have power and effect, plants you carry in your pocket, and verses you repeat. Well, in fairness to Mole, he said none of that earlier. What he described as a friendly woodland scene turns out to be a sort of Indiana Jones death trap, which to travel through safely you need magical herbs and riddles. A very odd moment, but it does add something to the pagan scene of Wind in the Willows. Then finally, on to number 5. This ties into something that's come up, I think, in both the previous videos, which is the repression in Wind in the Willows and the fear of change. I think on the last video I talked about how Toad, although he is described as being all the same fellow, is actually always thirsting for change. He actually seems to be kind of agonised by the fact that he thinks he's always had the wrong obsession. The next thing is always the big thing. And as soon as it arrives, he realises he has been wasting his life this whole time. It's very theatrical and histrionic of Toad, but no less vivid for all that, and that counts for something, I think. By contrast, Rat and Mole tend to privilege safety and home and security, and at the end of this chapter, snow begins to fall in the wild woods, disastrously, because now they can't find their way back. It covers everything with its blankness, falling like a fairy carpet, Graham says. Another note of pagan magic. And Mole and Rat try in vain to recognise a familiar face in each tree, but they can't, because it has been covered with this snow-white blankness. I think the fearfulness of transmutation is really in keeping with the emotional reality of the novel, while at the same time absolutely fitting of Graham's cast of characters. They are, after all, animals whose lives are governed by the seasons, as we see throughout the book. Badger won't deal with the problems of Toad until the winter is done. The book starts with Mole's ecstatic appreciation of spring after he bursts up through the undergrowth and escaping the blankness of whitewashing below. So I think their dislike and fearfulness of snow falling in the wood works really well in two ways. It has the Victorian emotional repression of not liking change and liking things to stay as they are, whilst also being perfectly fitting for animals who rely on scent, who depend on their local knowledge of their surroundings and condition their behaviour according to the seasons. So there we have it. We now weep penitently at the door of Mr. Badger, who we will be meeting in the next chapter. Until then, happy reading.